Charlie Rose was the moderator of this discussion. It's an hour and 10 minutes.
Absolutely. Lock him up.
You know, last,
do we need these?
would you do me a favor? I really can't do this because of my voice. Can you text?
Well, I can.
Oh, he could do it.
I'll do it.
I mean, he could do it. He's
All right,
our
I'll be
editor.
happy to do it, sure. All right, hello. I'm Steve Engelberg. This is Bill Broad, Judy Miller. Judy would be doing this except for the fact that she has laryngitis, so we want to save her voice for actually important, wise words. About 2.5 years ago, we set out to write a book about a very, very arcane subject, and I must say it was Judy, I think, had the original notion that this could be a book. I thought it was a ridiculous idea. Bill was more enthusiastic, thank goodness. And we went forward, and I always like to tell people that the fact we're here today having this conversation under these circumstances is proof, as you analyze the recent events, that flukes really do happen. You know, because people say, how could it be that Ottawa was a mile away and the anthrax was found here and it's September 12th? How could it be other than the hijackers? And I said, well, we started a project 2.5 years ago. We didn't know that the September 11th was going to happen, so it's possible perhaps that this is linked to exactly what it might be, or it's also possible that somebody else started their own project several years ago. Anyway, I think the format here today would, I gather we would take questions, Les? Is that the notion?
Each talk for,
okay.
30 seconds, 40 seconds.
All right. Well, let's see. I mean, I guess just to talk a little bit about how this all worked, I think one of the things that was remarkable about doing this book, and I must say that 3 people writing one book is a sort of triumph of hope over logic or hope over experience. I don't know which. It was a really kind of real adventure. But what we learned as we did this is that the 3 of us kind of come from very different backgrounds. Judy spent a lot of time studying terrorism in the Middle East and has had sort of hands-on eyewitness experience of us. She's the only one who's ever been close enough to, I can't say shake bin Laden's hand, but to have at least seen him within several feet. Bill, as you know, is a science writer and brought that perspective to it. And I came to this as kind of a student of the CIA and intelligence, and about halfway into it became completely obsessed for some strange reason, Lord knows why, with this bug known as anthrax, which just seemed to me to be utterly fascinating, and I became sort of entranced with understanding its background in history and uses. But what we found, and I think the government is now finding this, is that this is a discipline that truly crosses every imaginable line. That you really do need, when you think about germ weapons, to think about science in a very profound way. You need to understand how things work. You need to understand what's possible, what's science fiction, what's science future. And what was interesting, but that is not only the beginning. And what you also need to understand, and this Judy we very much brought to the table in this team, and in fact, I must say, if the book had been written exactly as Judy wanted it, it would have been even more prescient. Being the editor type, I kept pulling her back and saying, oh, how do we know they're going to do this, Judy? How do we know? She said, I know these people. I know these people. I've met them.
Steve,
You haven't met
let me interrupt you right there if I can.
Sure.
How do we know? Because we're doing a CNN webcast, a live
Sure.
webcast even now. And I think it would be useful if I held you at that point and put a question to you all and let Charlie take over when he comes in. Anthrax has been used in the United States now. What do we know about who did it and where that anthrax came from?
I think we'll start with the science guy, because he'll tell you how little evidence there really is.
Right. We know very little about it, other than it is an extremely virulent strain of anthrax, the Ames strain, which has been around through many laboratories all around the world. It was isolated in Iowa, we think, in 1980, but experts debate even that. It has sort of a clouded history. It's very hot. When people develop vaccines against anthrax, they use either the Ames strain or Volum 1B, which is a strain that the United States developed and used during its biowarfare program. So it's right up there. We know very little else about it. We have some clues that are emerging about the powder aspects of it, how it had an electrostatic charge that allowed it to fly free, not clump together. There's news in tomorrow's paper about some specifics of that, which again are kind of ambiguous. They don't point in any one direction. It doesn't say it came from Iraq or it came from Russia or it came from the U.S. A lot of these tricks of the trade have been around, spoken of widely, and written about in some cases among the community of scientists that do this kind of stuff. So there's no smoking gun at this point that we know of that points in a particular direction.
Let me press you just one step further on that, Bill. There's a report today that says, in effect, I'm embellishing it somewhat.
Please.
That when Ambassador Butler was in Iraq and handled the Iraqi biological materials anthrax, we obtained swabs, brought it back to U.S. labs, so we knew what the Iraqis were doing.
Right.
That the anthrax that has been used so far contained properties, particularly anti-electrostatic properties, virtually identical or identical to what we saw from the Iraqi swabs, and that this kind of capability was peculiar to Iraq. What about the validity of that report?
I don't think we know that to be true. We know that it has static-free properties, but there's dozens and dozens of different ways to achieve that. And we haven't found this identifying signature, bentonite, which was the chemical that the Iraqis developed for their program but never applied to making dry anthrax. So
Yes,
we've
been in New York today, but in Washington I understand there were some briefings to reporters and some statements by Army pathology people that ruled out bentonite, ruled out things you would have, elements you would have found had it been bentonite.
Right, so not only was there not the static-free signature, but also the strain, Ames, is one that Iraq tried very, very hard to get its hands on, and didn't, according to the chief UN biological weapons inspector, they never got it.
But let's be clear here. The presence or lack of presence of bentonite, or the presence or lack of presence of a strain the Iraqis are known to have, proves absolutely nothing. It proves nothing. It is entirely plausible that since 1991 or 92 or 93, the Iraqis could have pioneered new techniques to make this. They could have obtained other strains.
Sure.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that, you know, finding an AK-47 in an army doesn't mean the Russians did it. It doesn't.
Even if it turns out that there were qualities, characteristics of this material that were identical with things that were used in either the Russian program or the American program or the Iraqi program, it still only tells you that they might have gotten, the people who did this, some help from Iraq or from Russia. Or at the moment, the FBI strongly believes that this is domestic in origin, these letters. And the announcement today by General Parker that silica was discovered in the sample that was sent to Senator Daschle. Well, silica is something that the American program used, not the Iraqi program, as far as we know. But once again, it just doesn't take you very far. The scientist that I talk to and that Bill talks to says that until you have a complete chemical and DNA analysis and breakdown of this substance, you will not know enough to be able to match it up with something that we find in a lab somewhere. In other words, this isn't going to be like DNA fingerprinting where you're going to have a perfect match unless we get really, really lucky.
Now, having said all of that, lest anybody think that we're government dupes, I mean, obviously, if you look at the politics of this, and we've all been around long enough to watch the effect of politics on intelligence analysis, it would be extremely inconvenient at this instant for this to be Iraq. This would be astoundingly inconvenient. And so for that reason, we should look at all these claims with a little bit of skepticism, even a lot of skepticism. But by the same token, we can't fall off the boat on the other side and say, you know, well, and therefore it's Iraq. I mean, a lot of these Iraq things are intriguing. I mean, we could take the Mohammed Atta meeting.
In Prague.
In Prague. Now, Mohammed Atta meets an Iraqi intelligence officer in Prague, you know, when the plot is in train. Now, you know, the government's view of that is it's unconnected. And I guess the question I keep sort of posing is, okay, what is the benign explanation of this? Tell me, please. You can come up with one. It'd be great. But we haven't heard it yet, and so I think one has to be skeptical, sure, but one also has to follow the evidence. Because if it is proven that it's Iraq, obviously the consequences are going to be very, very serious. For one thing, we'll finally have someone we can bomb. No, I'm sorry.
I'm Charlie Rose, and I apologize for being late. Obviously, you were going pretty well here, so we ran into a taping problem at my studio. So could I just continue this, and I'll make a couple of little announcements here, but in a minute. But just if the FBI believes now that it probably is domestic, what's the profile of who they think might have done it?
Well, the phrase I think that we've all kind of used, but I don't know how far it takes you. If one imagines a Ted Kaczynski who went to graduate school and studied microbiology, didn't get tenure, that's certainly a possibility.
Or worse, maybe he did.
So we start off with all microbiologists who didn't get tenure.
Right.
Particularly if they happen to specialize in Bacillus anthracis or thuringiensis, that would be useful.
And developed a long antipathy for government of all kinds.
That's a starting point. Well, kidding aside, that's only one starting point. I mean, in fact, your suspect list, while it's not 250 million by any means, is not small. I mean, pharmaceutical companies use these very techniques that we're talking about. That's not unusual. So somebody without a PhD but with a good technical knowledge of the milling of particles would obviously have a chance.
But also there's really only one group of individuals that I know of who for years have said we need anthrax weapons, we need them for turning against the federal government, that have been out there vaccinating themselves with anthrax vaccine, and those are the militia groups.
But it's also true that we've gotten a spate of anthrax hoaxes addressed to abortion clinics.
Right.
So these are the only people who have repeatedly threatened to use anthrax against people they don't like and whose activities they don't like. So it's very complicated. I don't envy the FBI's
No, I mean,
challenge.
and having, you know, sort of attacked or questioned the Iraqi theme, I don't necessarily think that we can in any way rule out the possibility of foreign origin here. Why should we? I mean, until we have actual evidence that allows us to go in one direction or another, this is all just speculation.
Wait, but foreign origin mean it was not only developed outside the United States, but also was carried out by people from outside the United States.
Absolutely. I keep saying, let's stick to the evidence. Until we have some, it's very hard to swing in either direction. If you really look at the evidence we've got, it's very, very thin. I mean, you have a route in Trenton that a letter was dropped. So who did that? Was that somebody from outside, somebody from inside? We don't know.
And also this stuff, as I talk to the people who've done this, you get the impression that they, even if it hasn't been in print, they've been talking to their brethren scientists around the world about this stuff since the end of the Cold War. So even if it has all the signatures, let's say, of the American program, Ames was a virulent American strain. It seems now that there's evidence of silicon. I mean, a foreign government could just have as well, set this up to look like it was a domestic inside job, because the information is out there.
The point is, as long as the government has the information and we don't, there's a void and there's a natural temptation of journalists to kind of fill it with speculation that isn't really terribly helpful. So I think but as far as we can tell, as soon as the government gets information that it thinks it can release in a way that won't damage the investigation, it has started to release information because it does understand, partly because it helped exacerbate the fears and concerns in the beginning by its mishandling of this event. The government does understand now that it's very important to get what it knows out there, and this is a welcome change. one we as journalists would like to encourage.
What is it that you think is the biggest unanswered question now, other than the obvious question of who did this and why?
Well, is it connected to the events of September 11th is a really important major question that we don't have any evidence of.
But the argument now seems to be going against that because of what you've said and what I've heard otherwise.
I don't think you can.
That's as of
you can rule
today.
that,
I mean, this is,
yeah.
again, it's very limited facts. I mean, there are, when we talk to people in the government and also our own, I mean, I have been sort of involved at times in kind of pushing the coverage of Al-Qaeda since 1996 and thought an awful lot about Al-Qaeda. I have to say, if one walks down the road of saying, okay, what do we know about Al-Qaeda type events? Do they send warning letters? Well, this would be the first. They don't. This is not the IRA with a little code number, call, empty that pub now. They don't do that. So that will be a first ever. Do they arrange an event in a way that absolutely minimizes the number of deaths? Because remember, biowarfare and anthrax, the key thing you want is surprise. You want to take the dational anthrax, if you have it, and you want to go someplace where you can get a maximum dispersal with a maximum number of people, wherever that might be, a subway, you know, a closed room with a lot of people in it, Grand Central, whatever your target of the day is, and you want to disperse it. You don't want to tell anybody, because if you tell people, then they start treating them, everybody lives. You want, you know, that flood of people to show up at emergency rooms, looks like the flu, nobody gets treated, lots of deaths. That would be an Al-Qaeda type arrangement. That's what they've done every single time up till now. This was arranged in a way that deliberately gave away the most important thing you could. In fact, they actually said in the first letter, if you remember, take penicillin now. That does not sound a lot like the Al-Qaeda we've been watching.
And who does it sound like? I mean, has anybody ever had that modus operandi before?
I think about that.
That's a good question.
Not the Tamil Tiger. It's not the, who is this? I don't know.
Shining Path?
Not the Shining Path. Terrorist groups, by and large, are not big on the take penicillin now sort of approach.
or this is going to hurt.
Unless it's your mom doing it. I don't know. It just doesn't sound right.
Well,
so what is this?
I mean, is it?
It's very strange.
It's very
It doesn't
strange.
fit
And
the
also,
pattern.
the use of a letter, again, is a casualty minimizing approach. Your average international terrorist looks for the biggest possible extravaganza.
Just wanted to clarify one thing. Mark Kulacz, Housatonic.live. We are ripping this from C-SPAN on Thursday, March 26th, 2026. Sorry, I'm not a little bit more done up this morning, but this is what you've come to expect. The panel here, these are the three authors, Judith Miller, Stephen Engelberg, and William Broad, of the book Germs, Biological Weapons and America's Secret War. I've sort of taken an approach where I have like a monopoly on this book right now. The book was written over 2 or 3 years, and the release date of the book, the initial release date was September 9th, 2001. September 9th, 2001. May have been September 8th even, but I believe it was officially September 9th, 2001. And they are now talking about the book here, the three authors. The book has changed a little bit, as you can imagine, since its release. I have a full series covering this. I have the full book read, the original book read. I use Amazon Audible audiobooks, which is heavily censored. About 40% of the book is missing from Amazon Audible audiobooks. I read those sections in, and I have a full series where I cover that, plus I add additional information about the book itself. I want to warn you, the original book, if you go to the preface, the first sentence is, in December of 1997, 6 years after the Persian Gulf War, the Pentagon announced that it had decided to vaccinate its 2.4 million soldiers and reservists against anthrax. The original book lays out a very strong case in the very first sentence that this is really about the anthrax vaccine. This is really about genetic medicine. This is really about the Human Genome Project. This is really about the use of the U.S. military for the purposes of using this experimental gene therapy vaccine and collecting data on them. The updated book, as you can see here, says in the preface, on the morning of September 11, 2001, at the offices of the New York Times, not far from Ground Zero, most reporters were working on the devastating attacks in our city in Washington. but 3 of us were concentrating on the possibility that the hijackers, whoever sent them, had also conducted a biological attack in America or was planning one. That's actually radically different. So anyone that mentions this book, you need to understand there's multiple versions of it. The original version starts off with a very different preface. Now, I don't know what else has changed in the books over time. All I can tell you is about 35 to 40%, maybe even more, of this book does not exist in the Amazon Audible audiobook. I also know the Amazon Audible audiobook does not include the updated preface either. It doesn't include either one, for whatever that's worth. If you buy it, try to get the oldest copy you possibly can. I do not know during which printing specifically they changed to state the new preface versus the old one. The old one is probably the most powerful piece of evidence. Receipt, if you will. I don't like using the word receipt because I got piles of receipts from Home Depot all around me, and I'm not using them to solve 9/11. Try to get the oldest book you possibly can, okay? And if it doesn't start off with the sentence, in December 1997, 6 years after the Persian Gulf War, the Pentagon announced that it had decided to vaccinate its 2.4 million soldiers and reservists against anthrax, then you have an outdated version. Also, I stress, and I'm basically the king of metadata analysis as a competitive intelligence analyst for leading the data storage division at one point, at the time, the largest provider of personally used storage in the world, and that was Dell EMC Corporation. The book publishing date is what matters the most. If this book was printed in the year 2005, yeah, it's still useful, I guess. But it's the fact that it was before 9/11. It's a pre-9/11 book. Nothing in the original book
Could ever be changed.
because of 9/11. There will never be more assets created from before 9/11. That's it. There's a fix on them, which is one of the reasons why there's such a desperate attempt to cover up this book. And I apologize for interjecting here, but I wanted to establish why this is so important. Now, this panel was on USA Today and other Today talk shows in the United States the weekend before 9/11 with a very different, very cheery attitude. I also want to highlight that on the evening of 9/11, if you go to Housatonic.live and go to playlists and go to, I think it's COVID 911, on the evening of 9/11, Charlie Rose had Judith Miller on his show, along with Tom Clancy, Senator John Edwards, Wesley Clark, very important, and several other officials. So on the evening of September 11, 2001, the book staff, at least the key person, was in the studio of Charlie Rose. The narrative of 9/11 at the time is this book. I don't know how else to say it. This is the most important book. There's a reason why when you go to YouTube and you search for Judith Miller and Germs, the only hits you'll find is me. Now, also, I want to remind you that one of the most infamous whistleblower stories in the last 20, 25 years involving Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney, by the way, associate of Joshua Lederberg, and Joshua Lederberg is frequently talked about in this book. Probably one of the people that Judith Miller got most of her information from this book. It's another name that no one will ever mention. Dick Cheney and Valerie Plame. That whole story, it also involved Bob Novak, that whole whistleblower story that Judith Miller went to jail for. I want to remind people of that. I bring it up because I heard Luke Rutkowski of We Are Change or We Are Never, We Don't Change Ever, the other day mentioned that, but didn't mention the name Judith Miller, meaning the truth, freedom, transparency movement is led by people who selectively omit certain things like that. They won't mention Germs because they are told not to. They won't mention Joshua Lederberg. Judith Miller, yes, her father had a career working for Kirk Kerkorian, the Armenian billionaire in Nevada, who took over a lot of the casino skimming operations for the DNC. That's worth noting. He also gave $1 billion to Armenian genocide recognition. That's worth noting. I mean, there's so many things. It's all right behind the scenes. It's all right there. You can learn it all for yourself. You don't even have to listen to my voice, although I think it's very pleasant and beautiful, romantic, if you will. You can just read the books yourself. Be wary of anyone distributing this book without highlighting the fact that it was released 2 days before 9/11. Be wary of any PDF copy of this that doesn't have the original preface in it, because that's not what you want. You want the original. You want the original version. And we are coming up on the 25th anniversary of 9/11. This is the last thing I'm going to say. If you were to listen to most people today, we're coming in the spring now of the year 2026, almost 25 full years after September 11th, 2001. They sound almost exactly the same as these individuals here on a stage on October 29th of 2001. There has been no intellectual progress whatsoever on September 11th, 2001. None. Absolutely none. They're still talking about Muhammad Atta and plane hijackers and stock trades and Bush and should we go to war, and we don't know where the anthrax came from. It's the same conversation. It hasn't advanced at all, even though it's painfully obvious from the book, the original book, which has since had sections deleted from it. One of the biggest motivations, anyway. Sometimes we all use hyperbole once in a while, okay? Sort of like saying, I eat at McDonald's all the time. Well, I don't eat at McDonald's every freaking day, maybe once a week or every other week or something, But one of the most important, possibly the most important, but one of the most important things behind 9/11 is the Human Genome Project, anthrax vaccines, genetic medicine, the use of the U.S. military for medical experimentation. There's a lot of other global geopolitics involved. There's resources involved. There's oil involved. There's nuclear involved. There's many other dimensions of September 11th, 2001. But I would say that this is as important, at a minimum, as anything else, and possibly the most important. By a lot, by little, I don't know. And there's no useful conversation can be had about 9/11 without constantly putting the anthrax vaccine and the Human Genome Project front and center of all of it, because it helps ties things together. It either motivates things, or other major geopolitical events were leveraging the money and the investment and the intrigue of the Human Genome Project and the anthrax vaccine as justification to help them meet their own needs. You see? With that said, almost 25 years, no progress. We're making progress here. We've made tons of progress because we're just looking at the right evidence, looking at the real evidence. Thank you. I'm going to shut up. I want the evidence here just speaks for itself, okay? And I'm going to click stop at the end, which is, it looks like it has another 50 minutes to go.
Been caused by something that the perpetrator may well have not have known about, which is the billows effect of a letter being pumped by the processing machines in a mail place and then mail handlers getting the disease. That was probably unexpected.
Do the three of you have great differences in terms of how you see this particular, the anthrax scare?
I don't think so.
I don't think we do. I think we differ with our colleagues, because to us, this is not a bioterrorist event.
It is?
It is not.
It's not. It's small potatoes.
It's small. I know it's terrible to say, but it's a small event that is not what the government was preparing against and not what we were fearing. It's something that can be contained. I mean, my gosh, look at September 11th. That is terrorism. That is mass terrorism. Biological weapons are mass terrorism, capable of killing thousands of people. This is not that.
And this leads to the residual technical questions here. Like this, there's about 5 steps to mass destruction. They've taken the first one. You can produce a credible agent. Well, can these people do quantity production? Can these people, weaponize it? Made it with a munition? Do they have a delivery system? And then do they understand weather well enough to be able to pull off a large-scale attack? There's a lot of complicated steps in there. And, for somebody that goes down and does all those steps, they have a devastating weapon at their disposal. And maybe these guys don't, by definition.
What was the last bioterrorist attack?
They're small.
Well,
it
it was
depends
really
how you define.
1984.
Yeah.
This in '84 was in Oregon.
In Oregon.
Right.
Mm-hmm. In America,
This is
against
in the
Americans.
book, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and then, and how do you compare that to what happened in Japan in '94?
Well,
I mean, the Japanese thing, Aum Shinrikyo, as we all remember, did a successful chemical weapons attack in the subways in Tokyo in 1995. before that, they had made extensive efforts to deliver an anthrax weapon in Tokyo, 3 or 4 or 5 different, more than that, attempts, notably unsuccessful. In fact, it's very interesting to think back to September 10th. On September 10th, had this book been reviewed on that date, and indeed this conversation taken place, what a lot of people would have said is, this is alarmist. It hasn't happened, ergo it's not going to happen. And, if one looks at the history of terrorism, and a lot of our counter-terrorist friends, I have friends who are not in this field who do this for a living, and several of them said, why are you doing this? Truck bombs, car bombs, C4, that's what you got to be afraid of. It's the low-tech terrorism that is going to change our lives, and that's where we're going here. That's the future. And there is really a very limited history of germ warfare and terrorism until this point. What I think, in all honesty, was Judy's brilliance, because this came in we did have differences of opinion on this before September 10th, and Judy's argument, which I think, may be proving successful now, or correct now, or we may find out something different, was if you have people who are motivated to kill in large quantities, and we know that they're trying to do this, sooner or later they will succeed, and when they succeed, they will succeed in getting the material. If they get the material, they won't hesitate. I think there is a logic there, even if it turns out that this is a domestic thing. I think what September 11 shows us is that there are no constraints. They don't fear, like a nation state would, a retaliation. They don't say, well, gee whiz, I can't do this because they'll nuke my palace. That's not an issue.
Someone said on television the other night, the history of weapons of mass destruction is that they have always been used.
Well, that's not true in the case of the H-bomb.
The hydrogen bomb.
The hydrogen bomb, yeah.
But I think they would put nuclear weapons in the category as one category, without the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is true that, generally speaking, right, in the history of warfare, most advances sooner or later get tried out. It's interesting that in the chemical weapons field, think about that in World War II, nobody used chemical weapons. They did use biological.
But the Iraqis did use chemical weapons against the Kurds.
Right. Yeah.
There has been usage. And the advantage of a biological weapon from a terrorist point of view is the absence of fingerprints. Look at how hard it is to trace this back to the country of origin, to the group of origin. It's darn hard. So if you're worried about retaliation, this agent, these pathogens offer you an advantage. They offer you some protection, which is why I've always been worried about them, because there are people who would like to strike us, as Richard Butler knows very, very well, who are terrified of what we would do to them. And if they have some degree of assurance that we will never know who did this to us, it might embolden them. And that was always one reason that we became very concerned about this category of weapon.
Let me do two things here, is in addition to, for the audience who may be watching this, we are talking about germs, biological weapons, and America's Secret War, in part, a book that Judith Miller, senior writer of the New York Times, Bill Broad, science writer of the New York Times, and Stephen Engelberg, investigations editor of the New York Times, wrote. We will take questions from this audience, and when the audience would ask you, please, when you make your question short and identify yourself when you make the question. In addition to that, we have some CNN viewers' questions for this panel, which I have in front of me, and I will ask some of those to get it started and then recognize the people in the audience so that we can get as many people in this audience involved as possible. I'll take the first question from Gary Packwood from Houston, Texas. Why is the threat of bioterrorism any different today than it was 10 years ago? Does this one incident change anything significantly with respect to the threat?
To me, as a science guy, the underlying factor that we all agreed upon in the course of researching and writing this book that's worrisome is the dissemination of technical information that's happening globally and the dissemination of knowledge. That makes the threat today higher than it was a decade ago. These are serious issues. People who know how to make germ weapons who used to work for the former Soviet Union, to a certain extent, have a a very high card they can use on the open market, selling their knowledge, their wherewithal. Pharmaceutical companies have huge need for sophisticated devices that can be used in all these processes. There's this enormous burgeoning technology base that allows you to use this stuff. So if you guys want to talk about the incident itself, that's a whole other thing. But the technology trends are not favorable.
I think another thing is we're in the middle of a biotech revolution. As we all know, we've all read. But the ability to genetically modify pathogens at this point is becoming the stuff of high school science. So this time, we're dealing with an anthrax that responds exquisitely to antibiotics, to vaccines. The next time, we may not be so lucky, and especially given the spread of this knowledge. So it's not only the people who've been in a weapons program and are now on the open market looking for jobs. It's also the capability, what scientists can do today that they couldn't have done easily 20 years ago. That too is changing.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. The very first recombinant experiment by Cohen and Boyer in 1973 was transferring antibiotic resistance from one bacteria to another. I mean, it's kids' play, and it is done in high school now.
Yes, question here.
Ralph Bulchins, New York University. In what way can we protect ourselves as a society from this kind of attack?
Well,
In 10 words or less.
10 words less. I think one thing that we've seen very clearly from the last 3 or 4 weeks is that we need a public health infrastructure that is capable first of detecting when we have been attacked, because the technological solution to detecting germs is not there yet, so we don't have a reliable smoke detector or alarm that's going to tell us we've been attacked. We need that. We need to have doctors and emergency rooms who can recognize these things. When a man comes in Washington, D.C. from a post office coughing and says, "I can't breathe," you don't ask his place of employment. Obviously, that's scandalous 2 weeks into this, and that man died as a result. Which isn't to say that people haven't learned something from the past 10 years, but, you know, first and foremost, we need that. I think we're going to need, you know, cutting-edge science. There are people now dreaming about the possibility of creating a kind of system, if you will, where you get the bug today, you go to a laboratory, and within, you know, 48 hours, you can create something which is a vaccine you can put into people. Down the road, you know, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we're going to have that. Because the other guys on the other side, on the offensive side, are going to keep developing new tricks and new ways of doing things. But that's only the start. I mean, I think, you know,
And I think the depressing thing about the HHS bill that has gone up to the Hill is that it doesn't contain money, serious money, for public health. It really doesn't. It doesn't contain enough money for the things that every scientist and every, quote, first responder in the country knows needs to happen if we're going to really be serious about biodefense.
How much would serious money be?
Well,
a couple of B1s? No.
When President Clinton met with the group of experts that advised him on this question, and he asked the same question, they said serious money was a couple of $1 billion a year for 5 years. That's serious money. And this administration, you don't see any sign at all that they recognize that as yet.
As yet, even today.
Even today, because I haven't seen a supplemental go up to the Hill saying, by the way, we need surveillance. We need to train doctors and lawyers and everybody who may come in contact with someone.
Two other quick points on this very, very simple,
precise question.
Penetrating, because you can go on at length, but I think in some respects you can say we're safer today because of this huge international intelligence sharing that we've now embarked upon, you know, which we never had at this level before, and you guys know more about this than I, but, you know, there's lots of exchanges of information that are going on, and that's ultimately a very, very profound line of defense that we can use to protect ourselves with. Also, this group knows there are all kinds of political things, like putting a protocol to the Biological Weapons Convention, getting serious about creating a higher political standard against these weapons and a higher moral bar that says they're nightmares. They're living nightmares that we don't want to have anything to do with. And creating a strong international consensus politically, legally, in every way at our disposal to try to, draw a line in the sand and say we don't want to deal with them.
Right over here. Yes.
Alan Rosenfield, Mailman School of Public Health, Columbia University. First, thank you for the comments on the public health infrastructure. It's been a long time in the coming, and hopefully it will be coming. I agree with you on the numbers. Question for you. Say something about what you think about the vaccine we currently have for anthrax and what we would need if we really decide to use that, and perhaps comment on concerns about smallpox.
Well, that's what I got obsessed with.
Smallpox?
No, anthrax vaccine.
Smallpox is
Judy.
Oh, okay.
We split the diseases out here.
It's too much
Simple division.
Well, you were anthrax, you were smallpox, Peter, what were you?
General mayhem and pandemonium.
The anthrax vaccine was developed, in the 1960s. As near as we can tell, it is a reasonably effective vaccine, given the generation it is of. There are people who have very serious doubts about whether it harms the people. One of the unfortunate things about that vaccine is that, it had been given to, let's say, 15,000 people up to the Gulf War. It had never really been thoroughly studied. They had a wonderful opportunity in the Gulf War. They gave it to 150,000 soldiers and then proceeded to lose the records of who they gave it to. So this made it impossible to track who got it, how many shots they got, what happened to those people. They've now given it to a goodly number more, 500,000. They've kept pretty good records. It looks like a decent vaccine. We can make a better one, and I think we're gonna. And I think we can also make antitoxins that you can give to people when they've been exposed. All of this, again, is a matter of investment. I mean, the sort of second-generation anthrax vaccine was basically all but defunded in the 1994-96 period. So, now that we're serious about this, I predict you that we'll have a better vaccine. You'll see it move faster. And it's very valuable. I mean, all the studies that have been done indicate that this antibiotic-only approach is a second best. I mean, when somebody's affected by inhalation anthrax, what you want to do, if you can, is give them both the vaccine and the antibiotics and do it quick. And we're up to now, we haven't been doing that.
And also, should the horror of superbugs and designer germs that can get around antibiotics emerge, it's harder to do that against a vaccine where you have your body's own broad immunity working on your behalf. So, in that case, that's also another case for working hard on new vaccines.
Is there any doubt that they will emerge?
There's no doubt they'll emerge in the lab. There are questions about whether they would work in the field and would anybody use them. For instance, if you had a smallpox that was engineered to be even more lethal and to outwit the vaccine, there's a built-in deterrent. Who would unleash such a thing on the world? Because it's going to, ignite a global epidemic that would, possibly kill billions.
Though I think one of the worrisome things about the Russian program
was that
that was precisely the kind of agent that they worked on.
Yeah.
They weaponized smallpox. The United States did not. They weaponized Marburg. The United States did not. I mean, this was the agents that they wanted to work with. And we never, those of us who studied it after the fact and those who were in the American program trying to understand the psychology of their Russian counterparts, never understood why they went that way.
Still don't.
And still don't to this day.
Yes.
Yes, I wanted to ask another question about bentonite and silica. If it turns out that any of these, the anthrax and any of these letters contain bentonite or silica, does that necessarily mean that it comes from a state-run program? Or can people make anthrax treated with those things in a lab? And the other question is, can you talk a little bit about the pattern of the quality of anthrax in some of these letters? Is Daschle's letter the only one sort of suspected of having bentonite at this point?
Just on the additives, I don't think it points you toward a state program at all. Everything I can tell is that these techniques and these ideas are widely available. Bentonite is in the open literature. A UN inspector has written about the Iraqi investigation of it as a substance. And these, in science, scientists make a living by talking. They talk to one another, and these weapons people talk to one another. And a lot of this information is out there bubbling around the world. So I don't know if any, one tidbit would point you.
I think, though, that what it does suggest, and the conclusion is that it points to someone who knew what he or she was doing. It talks to somebody who
Right,
had
it's not a...
experimented with or had access to someone who knew this would work. So this is not an amateur. This is, hey, let's put a few things together and see what we get.
To offer an analogy, if there's a major league, well-run bank robbery, it comes off with precision, I mean, it's always possible that somebody saw the movie and figured it out, but it's also, but police and detectives would also look at, gee, which bank robbers have been paroled lately? Let's take a look, where were they, and it points you in a direction, but it doesn't take you all the way. It really, because, ask yourself this question: how did they get to bentonite? And the answer is trial and error. Other scientists in the 1960s sat down and began playing with known substances that had these properties.
Right.
No, not just them. I mean, a lot of people played with different substances. The Americans tried 67 different substances, some of which worked better than others.
There's hundreds of there's a lot of disquieting facts in all the technical stuff. There's hundreds of these anti-static compounds that are used all the time in industry. They're used, for instance, to make a floppy disk, so that you can, when you lay down the iron oxide, you want it to be homogeneous. They're used in toner cartridges, so when the ink goes down, you want it to be homogeneous. They're used widely through industry, and people in materials science and materials, design know all about them.
Yes, right here. Yes, sir.
Bob Lifton. There's a growing problem of antibiotic drug resistance in the country generally. Now we're throwing the Cipro on top of that and other efforts. Would you comment on the dangers of that as compared to the dangers of the anthrax that we're facing?
Well, I think I can understand the government's leap to Cipro as being the top-of-the-line drug. You want to give Americans who've been exposed to these letters the very best. But once the government discovered that what was in that letter responded to antibiotics, there was no reason on earth to stay with Cipro. And in fact, you can argue that the continued prescription of Cipro may do a lot of damage in the long run. And there were people, journalists and others, scientists, asking, why not switch to penicillin and doxycycline? Why use the nuclear weapon of antibiotics when it's not necessary? And the government still really hasn't answered that question satisfactorily. Because yes, Bob, that is our biggest problem, is that this whole generation of wonderful antibiotics we're now discovering that there are naturally produced bugs which can defeat them. So this doesn't help.
Yes, ma'am, and then the gentleman right there.
Betty Musham, previously we were told that anthrax was limited to farm animals. Now, is the anthrax that farm animals have any relationship to what is being put out today?
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yes, very much so.
This is where
the 4-H club is not infected.
This is where it comes from. I mean, the anthrax spores are a natural bug in the soil that get stirred up by grazing animals. And this is when the government gets its hand on a new isolate of the anthrax. It comes from usually infected cows or some kind of infected animal. So this is exactly the same thing. It's just that it can also attack people in 3 different ways. So it's all the identical bug in the ground, in the animals, and infecting people through their lungs, through ingestion, or through their skin. But it all goes back to the ground and infecting animals in a regular cycle.
Yes, sir.
Alan Hyman, Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. About 10 years ago, there was a great debate about whether we should keep smallpox in repository. And we did decide that was a good idea. And I guess so did the Soviet Union at that time, or perhaps it was already Russia, I don't remember. What do we know about the countries of the former Soviet Union and the repositories for smallpox and anthrax?
Well, who are you, Judy?
Okay. Well, we do know that the Russians fought, the Soviet Union and then the Russians fought long and hard to preserve the virus, not to destroy the virus once smallpox was eradicated as a disease. Now, for those of us who first came to look at this issue, we said, gosh, if there's no smallpox around, why not destroy the virus? Because there are only 2 remaining declared repositories. one in Siberia in a place that I visited in a lab called Vector. I mean, James Bond could not do better than that, right? And one in Atlanta at the CDC. But it is also known, according to U.S. intelligence, that there are at least a dozen other countries that kept their virus and didn't turn it over to the World Health Organization to be destroyed. And it is those countries that we worry about. Now, the Clinton administration, the first time around that this debate came around, America kind of was leaning towards destruction. But the Russians felt so strongly that we did not make a thing of it. The second time, and by now, Bill Clinton had really gotten religion on bioterrorism. We worked with the Russians to make sure that the vote at the UN went in favor of preserving the virus, retaining the virus at least until early 2000s so that we could continue work on it. In our book, I think at least some of us believe that this was a very wise decision. It is not a popular decision within the CDC to this day, but I think given what's happened to us and what might happen, it was a wise one.
There's also, they're working with it, and they're doing experiments every day. People down at CDC working with the Army researchers, a guy, I believe, at Duke, and they have glimmerings of serious antiviral medicines. That people who, the smallpox vaccine is not that great. As you know, any live virus vaccine can produce reactions. 1 in 13,000 people have an adverse reaction to the smallpox vaccine. 1 in a million die. So if everybody in Manhattan was vaccinated, you'd have 7 or 8 deaths. So it's a smart thing to try to develop alternatives. Hopefully we'll never have need for them, but they're on the horizon now, and it's because they kept the virus and they're testing against it.
All right, let me go here, and then go to this lady here, and then we'll have another CNN viewer question from the panel.
Lucy Commissar, to follow up on the question about Russia, in view of what's been known about what was done by Biopreparat and how many thousands of people worked for it, and also past knowledge about attempts of individuals to sell nuclear materials and other weapons privately. Can you talk about what has been learned and what is believed about the extent to which some of these renegade Russians may be selling either this strain of anthrax, or if not this, some other kinds of biological weapons? And since if we're going to deal with this issue, one has to deal with what is coming next and not just what's just happened.
Or just their knowledge, as simple as just the right kind of powder.
Yeah. So I think the first most important thing which we grasped as we sort of went through this research process, if you start off sort of schooled in nuclear weapons, you think about this sort of endless long train of things that you have to grasp to make a nuclear weapon. You have to figure out explosive lenses, and you've got to get the uranium, and you've got to enrich it. And there are all these various choke points along the line that make it difficult. The manufacture of biological weapons really is about knowledge. And the federal government had done this fascinating project where they gave a couple of guys $1 million, and they said, well, see if you can make some anthrax with it. And they went to hardware stores, and they went on the internet and ordered themselves a fermenter from some brewery, and used fermenter from a brewery in Germany, and but they knew what they were doing. They pieced it together and were able to make basically an anthrax-like simulant, by the pound. And so the crucial thing is not do they sell the strain. The strain, in fact, your question about animals is very much the point. I mean, you can find the strain in a dead animal. I mean, you can find the strain in nature, not to mention, of course, all the friendly germ banks out there. But the crucial thing is the knowledge. Now, Judy's had the experience, which she can tell you about, of actually going to some of these Russian institutes and seeing the conditions, and also seeing who else stops by.
And one of my early rounds of Russian biological former military labs, now engaged in peaceful research, I found Iranian business cards on almost every desk. And it took a little bit of persuading and a lot of long vodka sessions to get the names of these Iranians. But we found them, and Iran had systematically been hunting in Russia. Not just in Russia, but in Kazakhstan, in Uzbekistan, in any place where there was part of the old Soviet germ empire. They know where they are, They know where these places are, who they're looking for. And they made extraordinary offers, $5,000 a month, to a scientist who's earning $40 a month, when and if they're paid. And it was only the American government's belated embrace of these people and these institutions and the offer to work with American scientists, which is something they all want to do. I never met a Russian scientist who didn't want to understand where American science was, because we're very good. It was only that last-minute effort that stopped Iran from getting even more scientists than they already got. There are I was able to identify 4 Russian scientists that work today in Iran. I talked to some of them by phone. They are all working on peaceful projects, or so they say, in Iran. There's no way to verify that. But this little program, it's called the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program. We never spent more than $12 million a year on it. It was one of the best ways of making sure that these people do not go to the Iran and Iraqs of the world. And the former administration did not support it. This administration has been skeptical of it, though they now have agreed to expand it. But I can tell you that most of what the United States knows today about the Russian program, it knows because of the contacts that were developed with these scientists and with these institutes. And if the United States is serious about biological defense, investing in Russia is in our national security. And that, too, became very clear from looking at these programs. And that's not to say that it's easy to do with the Russians, and it's not to say that we don't have concerns about Russia, because we do. The United States has not been able to visit the 4 military labs that are still doing who knows what. But when you have 10,000 scientists out there on the open market, you must deal with containing the threat. You know, it strikes me as kind of a no-brainer. And it struck some very, very hard-working, committed people in the U.S. government. They came to that conclusion. It just took them a long time to persuade their bosses that this made sense.
What year was the Russian defector who came over who worked in the program?
That's what's really frightening, Charlie. The first one was in '89, and the second one was in '92. But what these people had to say was so closely held within intelligence circles that it never got out to the policymakers who needed to know about it. So the kind of intelligence community knew that the United States faced a major biological threat, but the policymakers didn't for many, many years.
Well, one of the fascinating things that we discovered, as much as as we've all studied the interaction of intelligence and policy, I think it was actually shocking to realize how long it takes to change people's minds inside the government about something that's unfamiliar. When we started the book research on this, there was an event. There was a specific event that got us going, which was that the U.S. government announced in December of 1997 they were going to vaccinate every soldier against anthrax. And so we all said, wow, they must know something we don't. I mean, there's some threat out there. There's some super secret report that we have to go find. So we set out looking for the Holy Grail, the super secret report that caused the government to put shots in the arms of 2.4 million people, because that's a significant step. And, I remember Judy and I were sitting at lunch with a former senior administration official, and he said to us, well, it was UNSCOM. It was UNSCOM that did it. And Judy and I looked at each other, and we said, in 1997? He said, no, you remember that guy, the relative of the guy, he came out, he went back, this is a reference to Hussein Kamal, and we said, but that was 1995. And then I said, and I've read all your declassified reports, and all he did was tell you what you already knew in 1991. He said, well, first of all, we didn't really realize it until it was sort of public that way in '95, and then, you see, it took on a couple of years for us to really understand it. And that is a kind of shocking, but I think very much to the point thing, which is that when unfamiliar events happen, having a piece of paper that says germ weapons are a problem, and there's a defector, and he's told you this stuff, doesn't move you. It has to kind of come in again and again and again and be repeated and be amplified and become part of the public.
That's a mic drop. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. It was the United Nations. It was UNSCOM. It was the United Nations in '97 that started the motivation to vaccinate all the U.S. military. It was UNSCOM. And the communications director, and in some ways the number 2 person at the United Nations, was an Indian man named Shashi Tharoor, who is still one of the most politically powerful people in India, and who has all of his books published by Skyhorse Publishing, the same publishing firm as Children's Health Defense. Shashi Tharoor, who never went to New York City to recognize the 9/11 memorial until the week after the statements made by Charlie Kirk that the U.S. should abstain from getting involved in the conflict between India and Pakistan. It was April or May of 2025.
And so we all said, wow, they must know something we don't. I mean, there's some threat out there. There's some super secret report that we have to go find. So we set out looking for the Holy Grail, the super secret report that caused the government to put shots in the arms of 2.4 million people, because that's a significant step. And, you know, I remember Judy and I were sitting at lunch with a former senior administration official, and he said to us, well, it was UNSCOM. It was UNSCOM that did it. And Judy and I looked at each other, and we said, in 1997? He said, no, you remember that guy, the relative of the guy, he came out, he went back, this is a reference to Hussein Kamal, and we said, but that was 1995. And then I said, and I've read all your declassified reports, and all he did was tell you what you already knew in 1991. He said, well, you know, first of all, we don't even realize it until it was sort of public that way in 95, and then, you see, it took on a couple of years for us to really understand it. And that is a kind of shocking, but I think very much to the point thing, which is that when unfamiliar events happen, having a piece of paper that says germ weapons are a problem, and there's a defector, and he's told you this stuff, doesn't move you. It has to kind of come in again and again and again and be repeated and be amplified and become part of the public conversation before the intelligence causes you to change the way you're thinking about it. And I think even then it didn't really change until after these events.
Yes.
You've made reference to, Christina Stewart, Society Editor at Vanity Fair. You've made reference to a stronger, more lethal version of smallpox possibly being developed. Do you anticipate that the new batch of smallpox vaccines that are being asked for by the government will be addressing that new form of smallpox? And more importantly, I have not read much about VIG being similarly stockpiled, and as you've referenced, the numbers of people adversely affected by smallpox would, in large quantities, require VIG. Do you anticipate that's also being stockpiled?
To my knowledge, the vaccine that is being developed would not take the bioengineered threat into account. I mean, it's just the standard, what they call the vaccinia live virus vaccine that they're trying to develop. And I think it's probably premature to go ahead and try to deal with it. I don't think they've done the experiments that would allow you to assess whether a smallpox superbug could actually be a threat. Notably, and we mentioned this in Chapter 12 of the book, the Defense Department is just starting to walk down the road of seeing whether a super anthrax that the Russians developed through bioengineering, whether or not that's a threat to our current anthrax vaccine. It takes a lot of testing and a lot of experimentation to do that kind of threat assessment. And it may turn out that you don't need to do it. You have to go do the science first before you make, enormous production decisions.
I made an announcement earlier that CNN and website is covering this, and also C-SPAN is covering this, and I feel some obligation to them to make sure that I get these questions in that have been sent in. One comes from Heather Brandon of Austin, Texas. Is the United States media currently being responsible in its coverage of the war and of the anthrax scare? I'd take the latter part of that.
Oh, we're very responsible.
And we can say that with perfect objectivity.
Absolutely.
There you go, Heather. And this is from Penelope.
We would be prepared to give a more serious answer. No, I mean, I think so far the media has been reasonably responsible. I mean, we're all in new territory, too. It's hard to know how much emphasis to give, a bioterrorism event such as this. I will say in the case of the war, I throw the ball back to the government and say the information release is so skimpy and minimal, and the access so absolutely tiny. It would be hard to know how we could be irresponsible.
It's like on the one hand, they're not telling you they're not telling you what they know, and on the other hand, they're telling you what they don't know.
Right.
So let me go to one more question here from Penelope, Blue Hill, Maine. The government and the media spoke primarily about the threat of anthrax just before the anthrax began showing up. Now they seem to be focusing on smallpox. We've talked about this before, as the next possible biological attack rather than plague or some other biological weapon. Is this because of information the government or others already have suggesting smallpox is next, or is it simply a shot in the dark?
I think it's a little bit of both. You know, they do know that there are clandestine stocks out there that have been undeclared. And they do know that the science is marching forward all the time with this. But I think the driving concern is that the consequences would be so enormous if you got a smallpox epidemic going that they'd be fools not to look at this more carefully and try to get in a better position vis-a-vis the vaccine. You know, it's like a slow wildfire. It just goes from person to person to person. Anthrax just stays right there. Smallpox is contagious.
And that seems to be the central point. Is there anything that's more contagious and more threatening than smallpox?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
And what would that be?
You know, I don't
think we need to give anybody any ideas, but the fact of the matter is that...
Is it in the book?
I don't think we go into the numbers, but I mean, there are other bugs, obviously, that we've all heard of, Marburg, Ebola, so on and so forth, that would be theoretically much nastier. Smallpox, you know, you have a 7 in 10 chance of surviving, which is, in the germ weapons line of work, actually not bad. That's, you know, they're worse.
If you do what?
If you're infected with it.
No, but in other words, you have a chance of surviving if you go get vaccinated with new vaccine.
If you're vaccinated before and even afterwards, they say there's some mitigating effect. But I think this goes to the issue, do we know, does the government know information, or have they gotten information that suggests there's a smallpox epidemic coming our way? I have not heard that. And we have no specific information. We've asked this question again and again. Do you have information about what the terrorist enemy is going to do? And again, we can't talk about that, but everyone privately says they don't know.
Don't know.
No. And I think the government has now gotten into a habit that I personally find highly annoying, which is once a week issuing 2 statements. Go on with your normal lives, be afraid, be very afraid. And I actually think this, and I gather we have another one today, I actually think that if one were trying to run a psyop against the United States, the weekly announcement that you should be afraid of unspecified threats at unspecified times at unspecified places, just about perfect. And you know, I fail to find any public policy justification for this except to be able to say, well, if something happens, we did tell you. You know, we used to say of Caspar Weinberger back in the 80s, if you write a story every week saying he's going to resign, 1 week you're sure to be right.
Yes.
Norma Globman, going back to the current events, you said that the scale of this and the way it's been done suggests that it's not a real terrorist type operation. But that leads to the question, is it a rehearsal? I've heard people talk about the possibility that this represents a rehearsal of techniques. And my second question and last one is, in terms of 2 ways of solving who's done it, which one stands the better chance? The search for the science, namely the nature of the content of the anthrax, or the detective work, the grunt work of looking for the root, the non-scientific way, looking for the mailbox, looking for whatever route the people took. Which do you feel stands the best chance of giving us an answer in the shortest possible time?
We'll take the first question about, and then the second.
When I visited, I can't say I visited, when I drove by a camp called Darunta, Abu Kebab camp, in the Darunta camp complex in Afghanistan, where I had been told American satellites had photographed dead animals in a test, what appeared to be a test range. That was described to me as Osama bin Laden's R&D phase of biological and chemical weaponry. He was developing agents and trying them out on animals. There is a next stage, and I think this is what the excellent question refers to. It's called T&E, testing and evaluation. When you try out a little bit of what you have to see what the response of a society and the target is. And there is some concern among government people who study the bin Laden group that what we may be seeing in New York, if it is connected to the September 11th events, could be a kind of testing and evaluation stage to see how the society responds, to see how quickly we detect, to see to what extent we can contain death and illness once we do detect. That would be a very terrifying scenario and a very terrifying hypothesis because it would suggest that they have greater quantities of this. It is just one theory, fortunately.
What is the most we know about Al-Qaeda's interest in and association with bioterrorism?
Well, we know they have been relentless in trying to obtain it, obtain agents. They have been hunting on the open market and through other ways. For nuclear, biological, and chemical, they're full-service terrorists here. They want whatever they can get their hands on that will kill more Americans. And so far, we had thought, the assumption was in January when Steve Engelberg and I did a 3-part series on bin Laden, it was thought at that point that he was just developing very rudimentary assassination weapons, biological weapons and chemical agents, very crude stuff. I think that's one of the hypotheses that's now being challenged.
I want to go back. The second half of the question is quite good, if I might. The second half of the question was, where is the most hope lies in cracking the case? And you actually offered 2 different levels. I'd offer a third. I think
I'm going to repeat what the 2 she offered first before you offer the third.
Well, the first was science. Will science crack the case? The second was grunt work, detective work, through the questions of which route, which mailbox, and so on. I would proffer that our best hope, unfortunately, is a third route, which is an informant. I mean, most criminal cases actually are uncovered because somebody comes forward, and we have to hope that either by putting enough money on the table or through some other means, we will find somebody who has personal knowledge of these events. Because I think actually that neither the science nor the detective work at the level of the mailbox is going to take you that far.
Yes, ma'am, over here.
Hi, I'm Julie Grimes-Waldorf from Travel Charts. And there had been rumors, which the FBI had said were without any basis, about things like stay out of shopping malls on Halloween and whatnot. I just wondered, are you any more concerned about Halloween or any other upcoming holidays or perhaps other dates with some kind of historical significance than you are about any other average day of the week?
We're full service, 24/7 Chicken Littles.
No, we worry about every day.
Yeah, let me go here. I'll promise to get you, sir. Let me go here to Win, and then to Stephen, and then right behind you. Okay.
Winston Lord, International Rescue Committee. My question has to do with dissemination. First, did anybody know a month ago that inhalation anthrax could escape from a sealed envelope? Secondly, we're finding anthrax all kinds of places in Washington and New Jersey. The latest one this afternoon is a woman has gotten who's not a postal worker. It's skin anthrax. Not a postal worker, not a media person, etc. I don't know what the details are. Does this suggest there are a lot of letters floating around, or we found all the letters?
Well, I mean, we started off with what I call the single bullet theory, that the Daschle anthrax letter had to have gone to, somehow cross-contaminated 58 letters, and it was all just that one little bullet bouncing around. I don't think anybody serious believes that the Daschle anthrax letter was the only letter at this point that contained that. We just don't know. I mean, people throw their junk mail away. I mean, it may have gone through a postal place and come someplace, somebody looked at it, tossed it in the garbage. I personally find it very hard to believe that was the only letter with high-quality anthrax. No, we did not know before that it could go through that. I don't think anybody knew that.
I mean, what we don't know about anthrax is really extraordinary. As Steve said earlier, and Bill, there hadn't been very much testing done.
Right. And we know very little about it medically. I mean, we've studied this in animals, but there's very little human data. And there may be good news in that. It's looking like some of the antibiotics are effective if taken right away. And that, there wasn't a lot of...
It's a good news, bad news.
As always.
It's a good news, bad news, because what we think we're seeing from these humans, remember, you can't test anthrax on anybody. Fewer spores infect you than we thought is going to be my guess. You're going to discover that this 8,000 spore thing that we thought was too high. On the one hand. On the other hand, it seems more treatable than anybody thought, because the original sort of suspicion was if you have symptoms, you are in very serious shape. Right. You may not make it. Right. Seems like if you get people with symptoms and you treat them aggressively with antibiotics, they do make it, at least a fair number. So, I mean, But we didn't know all this, because what'd you have? You had mill workers in the 1950s who were playing with, hides that got spores in the air.
Another
Nothing.
good news out of this is that this is a large-scale experiment we're living through, and there will be lots of data that will come out of this on dose and lots of other stuff.
I'm Steve Robert. I don't know if this mic is working or not. Now it's working. I'm Steve Robert. This is a two-part question. One is really a point of information which I'm confused about, based on an implication in some of the things you said and also some of the things I've read in the newspaper. There seems to be an opinion that you can take some vaccines after you've been infected. Now, for those novices like me, that seems like a contradiction, because we always think a vaccine gives you a very small dose of a disease so that your body builds up a resistance and then you don't get a big problem with the disease later on. So I'd like you to explain why then you can take vaccine after you've already been infected. Two, I'd like to go back to something you said earlier, which has to do with vaccinating everyone, let's say against smallpox. You mentioned that if we vaccinate everyone in New York, that 7 people might die. But that's true of taking Vioxx or Lipitor or so many medicines. That was true when we used to inoculate everyone against smallpox because there was a polio or whatever, because there was a real fear of disease. Here we could probably not vaccinate those people who are most subject to the disease. So why shouldn't we then engage on a massive inoculation program?
You want to start with that? Sure. On the smallpox is an unusual vaccine. You're right. Most of the time you have to slowly build up an immunity, and in the case of anthrax, you need 6 shots over what? A year?
18 months.
18 months. You know, smallpox, you can get it, the vaccine, 3 or 4 days after you've been exposed to the germ, and it'll still have the effect of saving your life. So it's very unusual that way, and it's the exception to the vaccine rule, if you will. On the question of the sort of cost benefits of smallpox vaccine, I mean, that's the heart of it. You have to make the judgment of today, now, given this environment we're living in, do the benefits against this very slim possibility that there would be an outbreak outweigh the costs of the side effects and the deaths that would occur. Also, face it, we're an enormously litigious society. Maybe if it was done, I don't think we could ever be in a position of, of ordering these things, but maybe it would be, your personal physician. You could ask for it and get it, something like that. And, it's a serious issue.
Did you get both of those? Anything else? Yes.
You want to address IG? No. Yeah.
Everything that would be needed to do mass vaccination is now being ordered by the government, and it is being stockpiled. It will take some time before those stockpiles are built up. I would think an added problem with respect to the smallpox vaccine is something that didn't exist, at least we weren't aware of it, in the 60s when we were still vaccinating against smallpox, was HIV population. People who are HIV and the families of people who are HIV positive cannot safely take this vaccine. That lets out a lot of Americans. So these would be very difficult choices, and I do not foresee as Bill doesn't either, a mass vaccination program absent an event, because smallpox is still an eradicated disease and long may it stay
It's
so.
also why it's not dumb to stockpile this stuff. You can use it to ship overseas if there's an outbreak overseas, so you can help fight that fire so it doesn't spread over here. You can send it to the place where it's breaking out. And even people who've been infected, if you're smart, stop it.
I'm trying to recognize people as I saw them, so my apologies when the mic. Here, sir, and then we'll come here, and then please, anybody raise your hand. I know I've missed some. Okay.
Mic doesn't work. I'll try to bellow. Sorry. I'm Claude Erbson, Associated Press. Do we know if there is one attack going on? Does the evidence indicate there is one, essentially, Or is it possible that there are various? We have 3 letters, we have a baby crawling around at ABC and nobody else getting sick, and we've got all these post offices and down in Lantana and the tabloids. Does the analysis of the illnesses indicate that fundamentally it's the same thing, or could it be a variety?
It sure looks like the same thing, because if you look at the letters, themselves, the FBI said they appear to be the work of one person. Now, there's a curiosity here. There's no doubt that the quality of anthrax in at least the media letters in the National, we don't know about Florida, is different. And what accounts for that is a real mystery. And why they sent the crummy stuff first with the take penicillin letter and then followed up with the good stuff and say we have this anthrax is very curious. And I have not heard one good explanation for that. I don't know what my colleagues think. It's very curious.
No, it's an open question. But also on this question, the strain is the same in every case. It's the AIM strain, AIM strain, AIM strain. And that's strongly suggestive of a single source.
Okay, we're out of time, overtime. I'm just going to take a couple more unless Les tells me to go further. Right here, yes.
Gligor Toskovich. Just interested to know how the 3 of you have prepared yourself against this grand experiment that you've referred to. Are you carrying Zippo prescriptions in your vest pocket? Do you have a gas mask in your big black pocketbook there?
To tell you the truth, the depressing thing about having done this book is that you actually know there's not much you can do. I don't have Cipro, gas mask, you can forget about it. There isn't that much you can do. I don't know. I mean, did you have any...
Short of collective security. I mean, I think there's many, many, many things we can do as a group, but individually, not a lot.
One last question right here.
Okay. The gas mask thing is a hoax. I'm sorry.
Norton Zinda of Rockefeller University. Do you find anything strange about the distribution geographically of the anthrax epidemic? I mean, it seems to follow Amtrak from New York to Washington to Florida. It doesn't start at Boston.
Yeah.
There's something weird. There's nobody in California.
Yeah.
Well, we've heard some interesting analysis of this. Somebody said that it was a kind of old-style sense of where the American power centers were. You had to hit the East Coast, that they didn't really figure out what a modern America really was.
I think the perpetrator is a media critic, because neither the New York Times, nor the Washington Post, nor the Wall Street Journal, nor CNN has been hit, and a lot of other people have.
My thanks again, and I remind you one more time that the title of the book is Germs, Biological Weapons and America's Secret War. Our thanks to Judith Miller, Stephen Engelberg, and William Broad.
Our pleasure.
We're at the Council on Foreign Relations. Our thanks also to C-SPAN and to CNN.
Our pleasure.
Oh, good. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Our pleasure.
Coming from a pro, that means a lot.
Coming from you, that does mean a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. Hop off here. I'm already tall enough. I hate to...
Have you talked to the Anthropology Center in Atlanta?
No, but these people I know.
They fall in this
Who knows?
I know. And these all have a legacy. I mean, I met Larry Wayne in Paris. One of these,
How are you?
Great thing.
I grew up on a farm.
Oh.
Anthrax was something.
All the all the veterinary diagnostic people have it. I mean, they stock it all around.
That's easy.
Yeah, they do. We've talked to some of the turnbacks. Norton, hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. It's an honor, really. Dr. Zinder, yes. It's a pleasure. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, I know well. It's a pleasure to meet you. Hi. Oh, hi. Wonderful to meet you.